What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved figures meets one of late-night television's most ruthless hosts? You won't believe what unfolds when Keanu Reeves sits down with Stephen Colbert for what was supposed to be a routine promotional interview. The stunningly quiet confrontation that erupted last night has left Hollywood in awe, social media in a frenzy, and viewers questioning everything they thought they knew about both men. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two titans clash in the most dramatically subtle late-night television moment in recent memory. The Late Show studio buzzed with its usual pre-show energy as crew members made final adjustments to the lighting and sound equipment. Keanu Reeves had arrived earlier that evening, looking composed in his simple black suit, ready to promote his latest philanthropic initiative. What nobody in that studio could have predicted was that within the next hour, this seemingly routine celebrity interview would devolve into one of the most shocking confrontations in late-night television history. As the cameras rolled and the familiar theme music faded, Stephen Colbert delivered his opening monologue with his characteristic blend of sharp wit and political commentary. The audience laughed on cue, completely unaware that they were about to witness something that would dominate headlines for weeks to come. When Colbert finally introduced his guest, the applause was a deafening wave of warm and welcoming adoration. Keanu Reeves emerged from backstage with that practiced, understated walk, settling into the guest chair with the serene confidence of someone who had navigated countless interviews before. "Mr. Reeves," Colbert began with an exaggerated bow that drew chuckles from the audience. "Welcome back to the show. Though I have to say, calling you the nicest man in Hollywood feels a bit odd given your almost, shall we say, unnerving lack of self-promotion." Keanu's smile was genuine, almost imperceptible, but he maintained his composure. "Well, Stephen, I think we both know that labels are just words. What matters is the work we're doing and the impact we're making. Right?" "The work," Colbert replied, his tone already carrying an edge that regular viewers would recognize as a warning sign. "Speaking of work, I'm curious about this new foundation of yours. Philanthropy is certainly important, but some critics have suggested that you've turned a secretive habit of giving into a rather lucrative business venture, even with a new book you have coming out. Care to comment on that?" The question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Keanu's jaw remained relaxed, and for a moment the practiced calm seemed to falter. "I think those critics," he said carefully, "fundamentally misunderstand what we're trying to accomplish. This isn't about money, Stephen. It's about helping people who are struggling with the same issues we've all faced." Of course. Colbert nodded with mock understanding. "But let's be honest here, Keanu. You've become a multi-millionaire off the back of blockbuster hits. You've now written a best-selling book that, while it's for charity, still brings in huge sums, and now you're launching another venture. At what point does helping people start to look like helping yourself?" The audience grew noticeably quieter, sensing the shift in atmosphere. Keanu leaned forward slightly, his serene composure beginning to crack. "I find it interesting, Stephen, that you question my motives when you've built your entire career on making jokes about other people's pain and suffering. At least I'm trying to make a positive difference." Colbert's eyebrows shot up and a dangerous smile played at the corners of his mouth. This was exactly the kind of pushback he thrived on. The moment when his guests revealed their true nature under pressure. Oh, that's rich coming from someone who spent years on set while simultaneously making a mockery of every single press junket at every opportunity. You can't have it both ways, Keanu. The tension in the studio was now palpable. Camera operators adjusted their positions, sensing that they were capturing something extraordinary. Keanu's hands remained calm in his lap, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a harder edge that few had ever heard in public. "You know what, Stephen? I came here tonight to talk about a cause, about helping veterans and families in crisis, but instead you want to play these games, make these accusations. This is exactly the kind of toxic behavior that drove me away from the Hollywood machine in the first place." Colbert leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from playful antagonism to something more calculating and cold. "Toxic behavior, that's what you call asking legitimate questions about your public actions. How very holier than thou of you. But what happened next would transform this already tense exchange into something far more explosive. The studio lights seemed to burn hotter as Colbert leaned forward, his famous smirk morphing into something more predatory. You know, Keanu, since you brought up the Hollywood machine, let's talk about that. Your family went through so much with your sister's diagnosis, never once airing grievances in public. Yet here you are, a symbol of self-preservation, milking that victim narrative. How do you think she'd feel about you turning a difficult time into your personal cash cow? The audience gasped audibly. Even by Colbert standards, this was brutal territory. Keanu's face remained impassive, and for the first time since sitting down, his serene composure completely shattered. "Don't you dare," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "Don't you dare bring my sister into this. You didn't know her. You have no right to speak about what she would or wouldn't think." But Colbert wasn't backing down. If anything, he seemed energized by Keanu's reaction, like a shark sensing blood in the water. "Oh, but I think I do have that right, Keanu. See, unlike you, I don't hide behind a carefully constructed persona when I have something to say. Your sister represented quiet strength, keeping private matters private. You represent the exact opposite of everything she stood for." The words hit Keanu like physical blows. His hands were trembling now, and when he spoke, his voice carried decades of suppressed anger and pain. "You want to talk about quiet strength and service? Let's talk about it. I've donated millions to cancer research while you were here making jokes about politicians. I've dedicated my life to helping sick children, to causes that actually matter. What have you done besides tear people down for entertainment?" Colbert's laugh was cold and mocking. "What have I done? I've held powerful people accountable. I've asked the hard questions that others are too polite or too scared to ask. Like right now, I'm asking why a man who claims to want privacy has spent the last 3 years doing nothing but seeking attention. I'm asking why someone who talks about mental health seems so comfortable destroying his own family's mental well-being." The studio fell into an eerie silence. Even the camera operators seemed frozen, unsure whether they should keep rolling or intervene. Keanu stood up abruptly, towering over Colbert's desk, his entire body radiating barely contained fury. "You think this is holding me accountable? This is harassment. This is exactly the kind of predatory behavior that kills creativity and integrity in Hollywood." The mention of creativity and integrity sent shockwaves through the room. Colbert's eyes widened for just a moment, but instead of backing down, he doubled down with ruthless precision. "Creative integrity? Really? You're going to hide behind that too? How convenient that every time someone challenges you, out comes the integrity card. You've spent your entire adult life using it as a shield against any legitimate scrutiny." What happened next stunned everyone in the studio. Keanu's face went completely white, then flushed crimson with rage. His voice, when it came, was barely controlled. "How dare you minimize what I do? How dare you sit there in your comfortable chair, making millions off other people's misery, and tell me how I should live my life?" Colbert straightened in his chair, his expression shifting to something even more calculating. "I'm not telling you how to live, Keanu. I'm telling you to stop using your public image as a weapon against anyone who dares to question your choices. You faced real persecution from the media, real invasion of privacy. You court that same media every chance you get, then cry victim when they don't write exactly what you want them to write." The audience was completely silent now, some covering their mouths in shock at what they were witnessing. This had gone far beyond a typical celebrity interview gone wrong. This was character assassination playing out in real time, and Keanu was visibly struggling to maintain any semblance of control. "You don't know what you're talking about," Keanu said, his voice shaking with emotion. "You don't know what it's like to have your every move scrutinized, to have lies written about your friends, to have your privacy threatened by the same people who destroyed my family's peace." But Colbert wasn't finished. He sensed his guest was at the breaking point, and with the instincts of a predator, he moved in for what would prove to be the final devastating blow. "You know what I think, Keanu?" Colbert said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than shouting. "I think you're exactly like your Neo persona, unfeeling, self-absorbed, and completely unable to handle criticism. The only difference is that Neo at least waited until he was in the Matrix to show his true colors. You couldn't even wait that long. The comparison to his most iconic role hit Keanu like a lightning bolt. His entire body went rigid, and for a moment the studio was so quiet you could hear the hum of the cameras. When Keanu finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried a fury that made everyone in the room take a step back. "What did you just say to me?" Colbert smiled, sensing he'd found the perfect pressure point. "You heard me? You're just like Neo, petulant, self-absorbed, and convinced that the world owes you something." At least he had the decency to wait until after he was king to start his reign of incompetence. "You started your tantrum while he was still alive." Keanu's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "You have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. You sit here in your ivory tower making jokes about people's lives, and you think that gives you the right to judge my art, to judge me." "It's not judgment, Keanu, it's observation," Colbert replied with mock reasonableness. "And what I observe is a man who had everything handed to him, threw it all away for a Hollywood actress, and then spent years whining about the consequences. Your art is doing the job. It's entertaining the masses without constant drama. But you're just another celebrity now trying to stay relevant." The mention of his art was the final straw. Keanu stepped closer to Colbert's desk, his voice rising to a roar that echoed through the studio. "Don't you dare bring my art into this. You don't know anything about my relationship with my craft, about what we've been through together. My art and I have always had each other's backs, and that hasn't changed." Colbert's eyebrows shot up with theatrical surprise. "Really? Is that why it wasn't at your last big media appearance? Is that why it didn't defend you when you were accused of being a recluse? Face it, Keanu, you burned that bridge just like you burned all the others." The audience was completely silent now, many looking around nervously as if they wanted to leave, but couldn't. This had gone so far beyond entertainment that it felt like witnessing a public breakdown. Keanu was visibly shaking, his face cycling between rage and something that looked dangerously close to tears. "You're a pathetic excuse for a journalist," Keanu said, his voice cracking with emotion. "You hide behind comedy to say things that would get you sued if you said them seriously. You're a coward who attacks people when they're vulnerable and calls it holding them accountable." But Colbert wasn't done twisting the knife. "Vulnerable? Keanu, you've made a fortune off being vulnerable. You've monetized your pain better than anyone in history. Netflix specials, tell-all books, podcast deals. You've turned trauma into a business model. At least be honest about what you're doing." Keanu slammed his hand down on Colbert's desk so hard that the coffee mug jumped, spilling its contents across the paper scattered there. "Honest? You want me to be honest? Fine. I came here tonight thinking I was going to talk to a professional. Instead, I find myself facing a bully who gets his kicks from tearing people down. This isn't journalism, Stephen. This is sadism." The camera operators were frantically signaling to the production team, unsure whether they should cut to commercial or keep rolling. The audience members in the front rows were visibly uncomfortable, some covering their faces as if they couldn't bear to watch what was unfolding. Colbert stood up now, matching Keanu's aggressive posture across the desk. "Sadism? That's rich coming from someone who'd spent an entire career playing a reclusive hero while still doing every single action flick he could get his hands on. You want to talk about sadism? Try publicly humiliating your craft and passion while they're trying to serve their country. Try accusing your family of having no proof of your love on international television." Keanu's voice, when it came, was barely human, more growl than speech. "You want proof? You want to know what it was like growing up in that family? The conversations about how fragile my sister's health might be. The complete abandonment when my friends were suicidal. The institutional racism that made my wife's life hell. Conversations that no one else remembers happening," Colbert shot back with vicious precision. "Conversations that conveniently can't be verified. How convenient that the only witnesses to this alleged abuse are you and your wife. How convenient that these revelations only came out after you'd already left the industry and needed a way to justify it. What happened next would be replayed on social media for weeks to come, analyzed frame by commentators and art critics alike. Keanu's composure didn't just crack, it shattered completely. "You know what?" Keanu screamed, his voice echoing through the studio with raw, unfiltered rage. "I'm done with this. I'm done with people like you who think you can say whatever you want about my family, about my friends, about my children, and hide behind the excuse of entertainment. You're nothing but a sanctimonious bully with a television show." He ripped off his microphone, the small device clattering across Colbert's desk and onto the floor. The sound engineer in the booth frantically adjusted levels as feedback screeched through the speakers. "This is exactly why we left. This is exactly the kind of toxic, destructive behavior that made our lives unbearable. You sit there in your comfortable studio, making millions by destroying people, and you think that makes you some kind of hero." Colbert, sensing that he had pushed too far but unable to resist one final jab, stood and called out as Keanu began to storm away from the guest chair. "Running away again, Keanu? Just like you ran from your Hollywood duties? Just like you ran from your family? I guess some habits never change." Keanu stopped dead in his tracks, turning slowly to face Colbert one last time. The look in his eyes was something that would haunt everyone who witnessed it, a mixture of fury, pain, and complete disgust. "You want to know the difference between us, Stephen? When I see someone struggling, I try to help them. When you see someone struggling, you kick them when they're down and call it comedy. History will remember which one of us was on the right side." With that, he turned and began walking toward the exit, but Colbert couldn't resist getting the last word. "History will remember that you had everything and threw it all away for attention. Enjoy your Hollywood lifestyle, Mr. Reeves. I'm sure your sister would be so proud." The mention of his sister one final time was the breaking point. Keanu spun around, his face contorted with absolute fury, and for a moment it looked like he might actually charge back toward the desk. The security guard stationed near the exit tensed, ready to intervene if necessary. "My sister," Keanu said, his voice now deadly quiet, but carrying to every corner of the studio, "spent her entire life serving others with dignity and grace, something you clearly know nothing about. She would be disgusted by what you've become, a bitter, cruel man who gets his power by tearing others down. You're everything that's wrong with media today." The audience sat in stunned silence as Keanu continued his march toward the exit. Some were filming on their phones. Others sat with their hands over their mouths in shock. This wasn't just a celebrity meltdown. This was the complete destruction of any pretense of civility between two public figures. As Keanu reached the studio doors, Colbert made one final catastrophic mistake. Unable to let his guest have the last word, he called out loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Give my regards to your art. I'm sure it'll have some great material for your next Netflix special." Keanu stopped at the doors, his hand on the handle, and turned back one final time. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but carried a promise that sent chills through everyone present. "You just made the biggest mistake of your career, Stephen. This conversation isn't over." The studio doors slammed shut with a sound that seemed to echo forever. For several long moments, nobody moved. The audience didn't know whether to applaud, boo, or simply sit in the uncomfortable silence that had descended over the room. Colbert stood behind his desk, still trying to maintain his smug smile. But even he seemed shaken by the intensity of what had just occurred. The cameras kept rolling as producers frantically tried to figure out how to salvage what was left of the show. Colbert attempted to make light of the situation, cracking a few weak jokes about celebrity tantrums and Hollywood drama, but his usual confidence was clearly rattled. The audience's laughter was forced and uncomfortable, and several people could be seen gathering their belongings and heading for the exits. Within hours, clips of the confrontation were viral across every social media platform. The hashtag #ColbertTooFar began trending worldwide with millions of viewers expressing outrage at the host's treatment of his guest. Hollywood commentators, mental health advocates, and even rival late-night hosts began weighing in almost universally, condemning Colbert's aggressive interview tactics. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Sponsors began pulling their advertisements from The Late Show, citing concerns about the program's toxic environment. Viewers flooded CBS with complaints, and several high-profile celebrities canceled their scheduled appearances. The network's phones rang non-stop with angry callers demanding Colbert's removal. Meanwhile, Keanu Reeves' dignified exit was praised by supporters, who saw it as a man standing up for himself and his community against an unrelenting bully. The confrontation, rather than damaging Keanu's reputation, actually garnered him sympathy and support from unexpected quarters. By the end of the week, The Late Show's ratings had plummeted to their lowest point in years, and serious questions were being raised about Stephen Colbert's future as a host. What was supposed to be a routine celebrity interview had instead become a career-defining disaster that would follow both men for years to come.